Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm looking at the 2024, now going to be 2028 electoral map and taking a look at some states based on the 2024 election results and 2020 election results that could be considered competitive or potentially competitive for the 2028 election. So the way I'm going to do this is when all the states' electoral votes are added up together, there's about 538 electoral votes. And I'm going to go through some of the closest states in the past 2024 election and take a look at their 2020 results and determine if they're going to be competitive states potentially for 2028. So I'm going to first start out with the state of Minnesota. Actually, no, I'm going to start out not Minnesota yet. I'm going to start with the state of Wisconsin. Because Wisconsin, we have a pretty clear idea of how the state's going to go. In 2024, Donald Trump won the state of Wisconsin 49.7% to Kamala Harris's 48.8%, a margin of victory of about 0.9%. And in 2020, Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in Wisconsin 49.45% to 48.82%. So if you round up to 49.5, that would be about a 0.7% victory for Joe Biden in Wisconsin in 2020. So this is a state that's been very, very close, under 1% in 2 elections in a row now. Wisconsin is certainly going to be one of the most competitive states in the 2028 election based on the last 2 presidential elections. Right next door to Wisconsin is the state of Michigan and its 15 electoral votes. A similar story, in 2024, Donald Trump won the state of Michigan by actually a surprisingly large number than expected. Many pundits and polls going into Election Day did have Kamala Harris nearly winning the state of Michigan, and the ones that did have Donald Trump winning didn't have them winning by all that much. Donald Trump actually won the state of Michigan by about 1.4% on election night, much larger than his margin from 2016 when he won it by just about 0.3%. So Trump won Michigan by 1.4. Back in 2020, Joe Biden won the state by a little under 3, about 2.8%. So this is certainly a state in the last 2 elections that both have shown very, very close elections and certainly is under 5% of margin of victory. This would put Michigan into being one of the more competitive states in the 2028 presidential election. Now we have the state of Pennsylvania and its 19 electoral votes. Pennsylvania is certainly, it was the bellwether state of 2024. It was the closest state of 2024 going into it. It was the state I said would pick who was the next president of the United States, and that is exactly what happened. Donald Trump won the state of Pennsylvania with 50.4% to Kamala Harris's 48.7%. And this would be about a 1.7% margin of victory out of the state of Pennsylvania. A very close election, Donald Trump was able to win here. In 2020, Joe Biden won the state 50% to Trump's 48.8%, a margin of victory of 1.2%. So both times, this state was decided in the last 2 presidential elections by very close numbers, which certainly would suggest that going into 2028, Pennsylvania would start out as a very competitive state, one of the most competitive in the entire country. So just right there, those 3 Rust Belt states, formerly a part of what many political election analysts would call the blue wall. Now, all 3 of these states, after the 2016 election, 2020 election, and 2024 elections, certainly they would all start out, in my book, as pure competitive states that are capable of going for either the Republican or the Democrat in 2028. I don't think it's really fair to say either state has a lean for one party or the other right now. So that's 44 electoral votes we can officially say are going to be competitive in 2028. But what other competitive states are there? Because there's more than just these 3 Rust Belt states. And this is where I start to look around the map at some other potential areas that were very close. And I'm first going to go to North Carolina and its 16 electoral votes. North Carolina is a state Donald Trump ended up winning by about 3%, 51 to 48%. This is one where the poll showed it to be very close going into Election Day, and even I believe it was about a 1 to 2 point polling average where Trump once again outperformed the polls from Election Day, and Trump won here by 3. There seems to be a trend in North Carolina where Donald Trump at least always outperformed the polls going into Election Day. 2028 will be the first time Trump has not been on the ballot since 2012, if you count 2016, obviously him being on the ballot. So it'll be very interesting to see how this one goes, but still, a 3-point win in 2024. Looking at 2020, Trump did win North Carolina, but he only won it by 1.3%. Both of these cases, the vote total is under 5% of the vote, again, being about 3% in 2024. That would be enough based on the under 5% margins threshold, would be enough for me to put North Carolina for now into the competitive state column. This is one where if the Republicans and Democrats have a very good night, both can reasonably imagine that it is a winnable state. I do think more at the presidential level, I don't think North Carolina is going to be really in much jeopardy of going to the Democrats. I would probably start it off as lean tilt Republican in my first predictions for 2024, but I can't exactly say it's not going to be a competitive state either. But I do think it's more competitive than a potentially competitive state. So I would put North Carolina for now in the competitive state column. Next, we have the state of Georgia and its 16 electoral votes. Georgia's a fascinating one because Donald Trump won the state of Georgia 51% to 49%. And Trump won here by about a little over 120,000 votes, a little under that, 120,000 votes or so in Georgia in 2024. So certainly Georgia actually was a very close state in 2024. And in 2020, Joe Biden won the state 49.47% to Trump's 49.24%, a margin of victory of about 12,000 votes. So Georgia in the last two elections has been very, very close. And you can make the argument with the Rust Belt and Georgia that Georgia might even be the closest of all the toss-up states after the 2024 election based on the margins that it was decided by. So you could realistically make the argument for Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. You can add Georgia right there with these states for pure competitiveness. That puts 76 electoral votes listed as competitive, and we still have some more to go. Next, we're going to go to the state of Nevada and its 6 electoral votes. This is one where Donald Trump I did have him winning this in my prediction, but Donald Trump even way outperformed what the polling averages were saying in Nevada. Donald Trump won the state by 4%, 51% to 47% over Kamala Harris, a win of about 46,000 votes from the state of Nevada. So this would be a 4% win, would still technically be under the 5% threshold I'm using to be a pure competitive state. But this would be more of a lean Republican win than a tilt Republican win, unlike Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. But Nevada, even though it was a 4% win for Trump in 2024, it was a 3% win, or about a 2.8% win in 2020 for Joe Biden. So this state, if it does in 2028 stay the same numbers as it did for Trump in 2024, where it swung about, what's that? Let's see, Trump got 51% in 2024. In 2020, got about 47.7%. So it swung about at least 3% from 2020 to 2024. If those margins hold, you can realistically put it in the lean Republican column. But at least for 2024 starting out, Nevada has to start out as a competitive state. That is now 82 electoral votes for the competitive states and 456 still undecided or not marked yet going forward. Now we're going to go to the state of Arizona. This is when Donald Trump won the state of Arizona 52% to 47%. The margin of victory for Donald Trump in Arizona was honestly very surprising to me. I thought Trump would probably win Arizona, but I thought he would win it by about 2 to 3% of the vote. Donald Trump won the state by 5%, which I don't think it has gone that Republican in any of Trump's elections, 2016, 2020, and he did it by 5% in 2024. That's the most Republican it's been since 2012 when Mitt Romney was on the ticket. So that was certainly a surprise. And 5% is just at the threshold where it could be considered a lean Republican state or a competitive state. The only hesitancy I have here is in 2020, Joe Biden was able to win the state 49.36% to 49.06%. Now, again, Joe Biden here got 1,672,143 votes. Donald Trump got 1,661,686 votes. And in 2024, we saw Donald Trump getting 1,770,000 votes, Kamala Harris getting 1,582,000 votes. So for the 2028 election, you can make the argument with Arizona maybe being a competitive state. You can make it with it being maybe a Republican competitive state to start off, where the Republicans would have the advantage to begin with, but the Democrats are capable of making it a competitive state. I'm really on the fence with this one. I'm more likely than not going to leave it in the competitive state column just because how close 2020 was. And it'll be interesting to see if the Republican nominee in 2028, which I expect to be Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, if he can keep Arizona a 5-point win in 2028 for the Republicans, is that a sign the Republicans have stopped the presidential trend of Arizona getting more and more competitive and even looking like become a Democratic state, have Republicans stop that in the tracks? So that'll be something very, very interesting to watch. With these states, we have Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. that is about 7 states that are seen as competitive states for 2028. And going into the 2024 election, this really wasn't much of a surprise. These were the states that everyone was kind of watching for on election night for 2024. However, the 2024 election, based on some of the margin results, did actually change some things. So we do have some more competitive states to go to. And one of them is actually the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire was a state that Kamala Harris, defeated Donald Trump 51% to 48%, a 3% margin of victory. And a potential sign of how this maybe could have been happening was the day before Election Day, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance did visit the state of New Hampshire when neither Trump nor Vance visited New Hampshire, I don't think, since the RNC convention. It was not really seen as a competitive toss-up state. And yet it only ended up being a 3-point race, which is why I think we saw Vance go to New Hampshire. And it's really shocking when looking back at 2020 when Joe Biden won the state, 52.7%. Donald Trump got 45.4%, about a 7-point win here. So it was very surprising to see it swing about 4 points to the Republican side, Trump getting 48%, by far the highest total he's gotten on the ballot, both in 2016 and 2020. Trump getting 48% is the best he's done in New Hampshire. And at only a 3% margin of victory in 2024, the most recent election, that is enough to say New Hampshire in 2028 at least starts out as a competitive state. I wouldn't be shocked if the election goes on. Maybe New Hampshire becomes more of a lean Democratic state that could become potentially competitive. But now, based on the 2024 election, has to start off as a competitive state. And we do actually have one more state that was very, very close, and we do need to say is potentially a competitive state, and that is the home state of vice presidential nominee Tim Walz, the state of Minnesota. So Minnesota in 2024, despite Tim Walz being on Kamala Harris's ticket as her running mate, was a 4-point win for Harris over Trump, 51% to 47%. This was actually a very close race, a margin of about, let's say, 130,000 votes or so, a little bit over that. A little over 130,000 votes coming out, maybe 140,000 votes coming out of Minnesota. A very close race, a 4-point race in 2024. In 2020, where the race was not as much contested, it was about a 7-point race for Biden over Trump. So actually, Minnesota was a very similar company to New Hampshire. A 7-point win for Biden over Trump in 2020. New Hampshire was about the same thing. In 2024, New Hampshire was a 3-point win for Harris over Trump, and Minnesota was a 4-point win for Harris over Trump. So Minnesota and New Hampshire seem to kind of be joined at the hip on this one, and how I think this could be a sign to watch in 2028, how these states shift, or if they shift at all, in the next upcoming election. But a 4-point margin of victory is under 5%, and that'd be enough for me to put Minnesota as a competitive state in 2024. This does not guarantee that I think it's a state that's going to stay a competitive state going into Election Day, or a state that Republicans such as J.D. Vance necessarily could win, like New Hampshire. But I think based on the 2024 election, you at least need to acknowledge the fact that this state could potentially be competitive and be very, very close. Now, so this is the end of the, I think, absolutely competitive states. Now we're getting into the states that were surprisingly very, very close and are places that I think could be really competitive in the 2028 election. And we're going to start out here with the state of New Mexico and its 5 electoral votes. New Mexico is a state that Kamala Harris defeated Donald Trump 52% to 46%, a margin of about 6% margin of victory for Harris over Trump, and a win of about 55,000 votes or so of Harris over Trump in the state. This is a place where if Republicans actually put a lot of effort into trying to get out the vote in 2028, could be a state that could potentially get into the competitive margin numbers. So New Mexico, at very least, is one that's worth keeping an eye on for 2028. I don't think it goes Republican, but it's at least worth keeping an eye on. In 2020, it was a state Joe Biden won by about 11 points, and it swung to 6 points in 2024. So at least a swing of about 5 points in one election. That would suggest for 2028, it could be competitive. I'm not putting New Mexico in competitive yet. I'm putting it in potentially competitive, but that is one to keep an eye out for. Now we're going to go to the state of Virginia. Virginia and its 13 electoral votes. This is a state Kamala Harris defeated Donald Trump here 52% to 46%, a margin of victory of about a little under 250,000 votes or so in the state of Virginia. 52%, 46%, Actually, I believe one of the closer matchups Trump has had being on the ballot in the state of Virginia, even better than his 2016 numbers of Trump versus Clinton. In 2020, Joe Biden won the state of Virginia by about 10.1%. This time around, it swung about 4 points towards Trump's direction. Harris winning 52, Trump getting 46. This is a state like New Mexico. I'm not going to put as competitive state yet, but as a state that could potentially become competitive if everything is going the Republicans' way. So Virginia is a state. I don't think it's a competitive state yet for 2028, but especially if there's a good governor's election for the Republicans in 2025, where it's supposed to be a good year for the Democrats. If the Republican lieutenant governor, Winsome Sears, can hold on and win that race, maybe that's a sign that Virginia is starting to shift back to more of a toss-up state. So Virginia is certainly one I'm going to watch. Now we have a very interesting one, and one that if you're very interested in following elections like I am, one that a lot of people are talking about, that is the state of New Jersey. New Jersey, a big surprise here, ended up going for Kamala Harris 52% to 46%, on par with the same results out of states like Virginia and New Mexico, and not too far off from a state like Minnesota. New Jersey is a very, very fascinating one, a 6% margin of victory. This is one that could potentially be a very interesting one to watch for in 2028, especially if Republicans put effort into getting out the vote efforts in 2026 and 2028, trying to turn this state into a toss-up state. This is a fascinating one to watch going forward. And I remember seeing this. I don't remember the exact name, but I do remember seeing some comments leading up to the election day saying New Jersey was going to be close in some of my YouTube comments. And to be truthful, I really didn't believe it. I mean, New Jersey's been a safe Democratic state for a long time, but 2024 showed that it is, or could potentially be, a very close state. In 2020, it ended up going for Joe Biden by about 16 points, but in 2024, it went for Harris by only 6 points. So it swung about 10 points to the right from one presidential election to the next one. New Jersey, at very least, I'm not going to say it's a competitive state yet, but it is getting very, very close. I'm putting it as a potentially competitive state because that's one to keep an eye out for as we get closer to Election Day in 2028. Lastly, one of the more potentially competitive states is the state of Maine. And Maine's a little tricky because I don't think Maine's first congressional district is going to be competitive. It voted about 22 points for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump. I don't think that one's going to be competitive. Maine's second district voted for Donald Trump by about 10 points over Kamala Harris. This is one you could make an argument it could potentially be competitive on the Republican side if the Democrats have a better candidate performing in the rural areas of a place like Maine's second district. Maybe this could potentially swing back to the Democrats, but I don't think that one's going to be too competitive. What I'm more interested in is Maine statewide. This ended up going for Kamala Harris by 7% statewide, and looking at the 2020 numbers, it went for Joe Biden by about 9 points statewide. So it did swing about 2 points to the Republican side from 2020 to 2024. I don't think this is anything necessarily to make a big deal about, but I don't think it's anything to just brush away as it's nothing either. So Maine, I think, is a state that, at least statewide, starts out as potentially competitive. I don't know about if it will be in 2028, but I think at very least it needs to be mentioned. Now we're getting into some areas where there is some discussion, but I don't really see much movement. Starting with a state like New York. New York did swing a lot to the Republican side, but it still ended up going for Harris by about 12%. So yes, the Republicans and Donald Trump was able to get some support in New York, a lot more than 2020 and 2024. I don't think it's going to be a state that's necessarily going to be too competitive in 2028. 2032 or 2036 might be a different story, but for 2028, I still expect it to be a Democratic stronghold. Most of New England is the same: Vermont, Massachusetts. Connecticut and Rhode Island did swing more to the Republican side, both being 14% victory for Kamala Harris in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Looking back at 2020, it was about a 20-point win in Connecticut and also about a 21-point win in Rhode Island. So it did swing a few points to the right in 2024. But again, 14 points is a little bit too much of a big margin for any Republican to overcome for 2028, but potentially something to keep an eye out for. Delaware, 15-point win. Maryland, almost a 30-point win. These states aren't going to be really in contention. Illinois was an 11-point win. This one did swing actually to the Republican side. It went from about a 17-point win in 2020 to an 11-point win in 2024. So, I mean, a 6-point swing is nothing to scoff at. That could potentially be a state to watch for in 2028, but I still think it would start out as a pretty solid Democratic state. Colorado ended up being an 11-point win for Harris. In 2020, it was about a 14-point win for Biden, so a 3-point swing, but again, nothing really significant to watch there. California, 20 points. Oregon, 15 points. Washington, 21 points, or 19 points, and not really anything to watch there. So that's pretty much all the states I see as being potentially competitive on the Democratic side for 2028. Are there any Republican states in 2024 that I think could be potentially competitive? Not really. It gets tough. Alaska was a 14-point win for the Republicans. I feel like that kind of takes it off the table. In 2020, it was looking like maybe it was trending in that direction. It was about a 10-point win for Trump, which was less than what it was in 2016. Maybe it was trending that way, but I don't think so. Texas was about a 6-point win in 2020. It was looking like Democrats might have had momentum there, but then Trump won it in 2024 by 14 points. So I kind of think that stopped any momentum in the state of Texas. Kansas, a 16-point win. Nebraska's second district was again a 5-point district. So I actually do think Nebraska's second district was a 5-point win in 2024. Looking at 2020, it was about a 5-point win again. So I don't think that Nebraska's second district, I can't really say it's competitive or potentially competitive. I would say it's probably Nebraska's second district probably starts off as a Democratic favorite to win. I don't think the Republicans going to start off as a favorite to win the second district, so I would at least say that. But maybe the second district could be competitive, but I think the Democrats will start out favored in that district. Looking at some other states from 2024, Utah wasn't really competitive, nor was most of the Midwestern states. Iowa was a 13-point win for Donald Trump, so I don't think you can really say that's a competitive state. Nor Missouri, Texas, already went over, 14-point win for Trump. I don't think that's going to be competitive. Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, no. Ohio was an 11-point win, kind of like Illinois, Ohio. I don't think it's going to be competitive for 2024. Maybe if things went really bad in 2026, it might open some eyes up that Democrats could feel like that maybe they can make a run out like they did with New Jersey on the Republican side, but I don't think so. South Carolina, no. Florida voting 13 points for Donald Trump. I think that's a Republican safe stronghold now. I don't think that's going to be a very contested area. Maine second district, again, a 10-point win for Trump. I think that's more starting out in the Republican direction than in the competitive direction. So based on the 2024 election, there really aren't many areas where the Democrats could look at Republican areas outside of the competitive states that I've already gone over as places they can flip. What I mean by that is I don't think, barring an absolutely great tidal wave of a Democratic win in 2028, we're not going to see Florida, Texas, or Ohio, or Iowa going Democrat anytime soon, based on how 2024 went and the margins that they went from 2020 to 2024. So for the sake of this video, I think right now, you could say there's about 107 electoral votes across all the states in the goldish yellow color that I think are going to be really important to watch for going into 2028. And there are a few states in the lightish blue color, New Mexico, Virginia, New Jersey, and Maine, and then maybe Nebraska's second district, that are on the Democratic side to start out, but could potentially become competitive in a close election in 2028. Where on the Republican side, I haven't really been able to see any that I think would start out as potentially competitive on the Republican side. That will do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like. And if you really liked it, please remember to click the subscribe button and make sure you turn post notifications on so you always get notified when I post a new video. That way you never miss one. Also, please remember to share this video with your friends and family if you really like the video. And remember to stay tuned because I'll be posting at least one video every single day leading up until Election Day. So I'd really appreciate it if you keep coming back and watching those videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.